Picture this: a country ranked among the cleanest, safest, most beautiful places on Earth. A country that once promised its people something genuinely rare, a fair shot at a good life, affordable homes, stable jobs, clean air, open space, and a real future within reach. That was the deal New Zealand offered, and for a long time it delivered. But something has gone seriously wrong. The dream that drew generations to these islands and convinced millions to stay, plant roots, and build their lives here is quietly dying. Not from a natural disaster, not from a war, but from something slower, and in many ways far more devastating. Decades of short-sighted decisions, broken promises, and a political class that keeps telling its people to wait just a little longer. Things will sort themselves out. Today we break down exactly what happened to the New Zealand dream, where it went, who let it slip, and whether there is any road back from here. For most of the 20th century, New Zealand punched well above its weight. Small nation, exceptional quality of life. Average Kiwis could own land, raise a family, and retire without catastrophe. That compact between citizen and country felt real, and it felt earned. Fast forward to today, that compact is in pieces. Real wages have stagnated for years. Household disposable income, adjusted for inflation, has been quietly shrinking. Not dramatically, but steadily. Like a slow leak you only notice when the tank runs completely dry. People are working longer hours for less purchasing power. The cost of nearly everything, groceries, energy, healthcare, transport, has outpaced wage growth year after year, leaving ordinary families falling further behind with each passing month. The stats tell a brutal, honest story. New Zealand's economy grew at just 0.2% in Q4 of 2025. Put that number in a real context. That's not growth. That's a country barely keeping the lights on. Healthy economies need sustained, meaningful expansion to fund public services, generate employment, and lift living standards. At 0.2%, none of that is happening at any meaningful scale. People are treading water, and the current keeps getting stronger. At the same time, New Zealand's annual trade deficit has widened to 3.2 billion New Zealand dollars. That means the country is now importing far more than it exports. That gap matters because it signals a structural problem running far deeper than any single policy decision. The country's not producing enough value to sustain the lifestyle its citizens expect and have every right to expect. The country is effectively living beyond its means, and ordinary working people are the ones absorbing that cost every single day. Here is where things get uncomfortable, because this didn't happen by accident. New Zealand is going broke because its governments, across the board, have consistently made short-sighted decisions. They sell off successful companies to overseas buyers the moment they start performing well, and they allow speculative investors to drive up prices without enforcing meaningful capital gains taxes. That is not a fringe opinion. That is a lived experience backed by a consistent and painful pattern of decisions that, looking back, were almost designed to hollow out the economy from the inside. One of the most damaging examples is the national government's 49% sell-off of the country's power companies. The pitch was simple: raise cash, plug the budget gap, and move on. But what actually happened was this. Those energy companies, once orientated around serving New Zealanders at fair and accessible prices, became structurally obligated to generate returns for shareholders instead. Public service versus shareholder profit. Public service lost decisively. Energy prices surged. A basic household necessity became a genuine financial burden for working families across the country. And the money that should have circulated within the domestic economy flowed instead to overseas investors who'd no real stake in New Zealand's long-term well-being. That is the pattern. Sell off profitable public assets, pocket the short-term cash injection, and leave future generations to carry the consequences. Those generations are now here, and those consequences have arrived. Manufacturing was supposed to be part of the answer, a pathway to building domestic industry, creating real and durable employment, and creating chronic import dependency. But as one resident described it, manufacturing will not return to New Zealand at scale because the cost of living and the cost of doing business here is simply too high. The country has priced itself out of its own economy. That is the trap stated plainly. High living costs push wages upward. Higher wages drive up business operating costs. Higher costs make New Zealand uncompetitive in the global market. So, the factories don't return, investment flows elsewhere, and New Zealand stays locked inside a cycle of importing more than it produces year after year. Now, you might be thinking, okay, the economy is struggling and wages are flat, but surely people still have roofs over their heads. At least the basics are still intact. The housing situation cannot be that severe. But here's the thing, it is. In fact, for millions of New Zealanders, housing is no longer just a struggle, it's the defining crisis of their generation. And what happened to New Zealand's property market is one of the most consequential and, frankly, devastating economic stories of the past 2 decades. New Zealand's housing crisis was not a natural accident. It was built, slowly and very profitably, by a system that treats homes as investment vehicles rather than as places where real people actually live. For years, the government permitted speculative investors to pile into the property market without meaningful capital gains taxation. The result was entirely predictable to anyone who looked. House prices exploded. Between 2010 and 2022, median house prices in Auckland more than tripled. Cities like Wellington and Christchurch followed the same deep trajectory. First, home buyers were effectively priced out of their own cities. An entire generation of young New Zealanders watched the ladder get pulled up just as they were reaching for the first rung. And here's where immigration becomes a central part of that story. New Zealand brought in hundreds of thousands of new residents, not inherently a flawed policy decision, but without ensuring the infrastructure existed to absorb them responsibly. Not enough housing, not enough hospital beds, not enough classrooms. The population grew rapidly, the infrastructure didn't keep pace, and that mounting, sustained pressure fed directly into the cost spiral, now squeezing everyone. New Zealanders cannot even afford to buy their own products. The country brought in hundreds of thousands of immigrants without ensuring extra infrastructure was in place, and now everything is becoming more expensive while wages stay completely flat. A country whose citizens cannot afford what their country produces, and that's not a housing crisis in isolation. That's an economy that has turned against its own people. Beneath all of this, the stagnant wages and the crumbling infrastructure, there's a deeper, slower problem that ties everything together: productivity. Productivity measures how much economic output a country generates per hour worked. When productivity grows consistently, living standards follow. When it stagnates, everything else gradually slides backwards. New Zealand's productivity growth has lagged behind comparable nations for decades. The OECD has flagged it repeatedly, year after year. The gap between New Zealand and the leading economies has widened further. Geographic isolation dries up the cost of trade. That is a real constraint. But isolation alone doesn't explain all of it. Chronic underinvestment in research and development, persistent failure to build high-value export industries, and over-reliance on primary commodities like dairy and tourism. These are not geographic accidents. These are choices made by successive governments. And now, as the global economy transforms, as artificial intelligence, automation, and advanced manufacturing fundamentally redefine what competitive economies look like, New Zealand is entering that transformation from a structurally weakened position, carrying decades of underinvestment and misaligned priorities on its back. That 0.2 GDP figure from Q4 2025 is not one bad quarter to be explained away. It's the measurable symptom of stagnation years in the making. The 3.2 billion New Zealand dollar trade deficit is not a balance sheet technicality. It's a hard evidence of the economy failing to generate the value its people genuinely need. And above all, it sits a leadership class that simply doesn't know what to do. A government that responds to systemic structural crisis with reassurances that if people are just patient enough, somehow everything will work itself out. New Zealand is not a country that ran out of luck or out of resources. It's not a cautionary tale written by geography or circumstance. Its people are educated, resilient, hardworking, and deeply attached to what this place once represented and once reliably delivered to those who worked for it. But potential alone does not pay rent. Sentiment does not rebuild broken infrastructure or reverse decades of failed, short-sighted policy choices. The dream is not dead, but it's on life support, and the machine is not running on much. And the moment New Zealanders stop asking hard, uncomfortable questions about exactly how they got here, that is when it truly ends for good. New Zealand is not the only country with shortcomings. Check out these videos, and I'll see you there.